Kia ora, I'm Seán Barnes, Social Procurement Director at Ākina. I wanted to start with a whakatauki. I te pioke no rangaunu he o tōna. The small pioki of rangaunu, small as may be, has a wake. You'll understand the relevance of this nai toko proverb in a moment as we explore this topic of social procurement. So, I've called this changing procurement. First of all, let's start with some definitions. Basically, if you think of procurement as the process that's used to acquire goods and services and works, social procurement is doing that, but generating positive social, environmental and cultural outcomes. So there's a few key points I want to make here. First of all, that social procurement is not separate from procurement. It's just a different way of doing procurement. The second thing is that these outcomes are embedded and intentional, otherwise it's not what I'm talking about here. And also I've taken a positive framing here. Equally, I acknowledge there's a need to minimise the negative impacts of supply chains, but here is the opportunity that exists in social procurement. Another point to make is social procurement is used interchangeably with sustainable procurement. It's also been called progressive procurement by other organisations, but ultimately what we're trying to do with procurement here is use it as a tool to drive impact, and that's really what this is all about. So why does social procurement matter? So we all understand that social enterprises and impact-led enterprises all trade to generate revenue, so they have to sell goods and services to do that, and this is what enables them to deliver positive impact. In order to trade, they need access to markets and opportunities as a really key aspect of that. So basically, other organisations can then buy from these organisations that I'm talking about and use the supply chain to deliver the positive impacts and outcomes. So this is, from a social enterprise perspective, you can get positive outcomes from purchasing from social enterprises. I like to say, thinking of it as spending the same dollar twice, or 3 times, or 4 times. I guess the theory behind this is that if we can start to change the way procurement's done with our buyers, it's going to lead to an improved market access for social enterprises, which will lead to financial sustainability for these enterprises and ultimately a greater impact. So that's really the drive through this. What's the context for change? There's 3 key drivers that I'd like to highlight here. First of all, procurement wants to and needs to change. Current procurement professionals rate their job or the important aspects of their job and highlight cost reduction and risk management. A survey was done a couple of years ago that said that's their purpose. If you ask them about 2030, which is about 10 years away, procurement's about supplier innovation and driving sustainability. Now those 2 things are very, very different, which indicates first of all that procurement wants to change, and also in this changing world it actually needs to change to meet pace with other expectations around sustainability and the like. The other thing is procurement is becoming a strategic function in organisations. It's no longer just purchasing, and it's no longer just making some things happen and buying some stuff. It's actually a strategic function and it's a driver for change, so it can be used in that way. The second key outcome is that increasingly private and public spending is seeking to deliver impact. Now there's a couple of things that sit inside that. First of all, there's a massive opportunity. In New Zealand, business expenditure is around $600 billion annually. The government spends between $45 and $50 billion. That's a lot of expenditure that could be used in this way. The other thing is there's a desire to want to deliver impact through procurement, and increasingly a lot of organisations are realising it's one thing to stand up and have a sustainability narrative about all the great things you do as an organisation, but you can't really do that when you're beating your supply chain with cost and as your main driver. So it's another really interesting thing. Related to that is that the biggest negative impacts, and also argue the upside for major companies, is associated with their supply chains. So if you do not work with your supply chains, you will not meet your sustainability objectives. And to some organisations, that's 90% plus of their impact. The other thing that I want to highlight is government procurement is failing. It's failing globally and it has a lot of embedded problems. A recent UK government report highlighted issues like an ongoing reduction in competition for contracts. Ideally what you don't have going on in procurement, you want competition, otherwise it doesn't work. Low participation by SMEs or small medium enterprises in government procurement. Again, not a great outcome considering there's a lot of innovation that sits in there, and 97% plus of New Zealand economy is small medium enterprise. And also issues such as government's biggest suppliers increasingly aren't paying tax in the country. So yet they're rewarded with government contracts, which creates this perverse cycle. So there's a few things, I'm not saying they necessarily apply to New Zealand because I haven't seen that, but they are things that I'm sure are top of mind for the New Zealand government. The third thing is the rise of diverse suppliers. This is a very broad statement, but around the world there is a rise in suppliers like social enterprises who are growing in scale, influence, and are increasingly supported by intermediaries that accelerate this movement. A great example is across the ditch with our sister organisation, Social Traders. They estimate that over the last 2 years, $100 million of deals were done between their buyer members and their supplier members in just 2 years. And interestingly, if you want to talk about outcomes and impact, the social return on investment of that is estimated at over $8 for every dollar that's spent. So take your 100 million and multiply it by 8, and that's what we're talking about. What's happening in New Zealand? I'm proud to stand here and say that we have similar conditions for change, and also we're seeing similar things that we've previously looked overseas and pointed at and said this is really great, we wish we could do it in New Zealand. First of all, we've had a change in government procurement rules, which I can't understate the impact of, and I've continually blown away that it's a lot more than what I thought it would be. We also have a number of initiatives, including Ākina's own social procurement program Forward, which is focused on growing the social enterprise aspect of social procurement. We've got He Waka Eke Noa, which is focused on growing Māori and Pacific-owned businesses in New Zealand. We have the rise in really significant scale and growing scale of organisations like community enterprises. So I roll all this up and I say we're fast following other jurisdictions that we always used to look at and admire, and we have excellent conditions to continue to develop our own New Zealand or Aotearoa flavour of social procurement, and this is happening very, very quickly. So what's the opportunity for government? I always like to use this diagram just to simplify it really, and there's opportunities for government all over this diagram. Firstly, I put leadership up the top. All around the world, the way government does procurement influences the way procurement's done in a country. Not only in the direct spend, but through influence and indirectly. I like to say that the smoke signals that government has put out through the changed procurement rules are already changing the attitudes and behaviours of suppliers. And this takes boldness to continue to act in that way. We need to grow willing buyers, including government itself. So that's one side of the equation, but we also need capable suppliers to meet the needs of willing buyers. This takes effort on both sides. Activating the marketplace is the magic in the middle. It's not just about creating opportunities, it's about supporting this with brokering, connecting and learning. This takes support. So there's a lot of things in there, but we need to work on all these pieces of the puzzle for it to be effective. So what do we think government should do? First of all, right in the middle, this requires change. This requires, particularly for buyers like government, to step forward and be part of this change. Stepping around the diagram, we need to embed this into procurement practice. As I said before, it's not different from procurement. It's not a separate thing. This is how procurement can be done. And we need to particularly demonstrate new ways of assessing and encouraging value. We need to learn what works. We need to share that widely. But most importantly, I think we all need to be on the same page. Otherwise, we're going to end up with an ad hoc collection of random approaches by the private sector and government. Building the capability of buyers and suppliers together is a really effective way of doing this, so they can both better do procurement from an efficiency perspective, but also more importantly, grow the impact, which is the effectiveness piece. So procurement needs to think about efficiency and effectiveness. We're also identifying the opportunity for new fit-for-purpose suppliers to meet market demand and to deliver impact in a way that's got a market opportunity already there, ready for action, and basically to invest into these to get them up and running and growing. The last thing I wanted to highlight is the opportunity to partner for outcomes here and to continue to promote the weaving together of new kinds of partnerships, notably between the private sector and what we identify as the charity sector, which relates to the opportunities of new suppliers above.